Early 72, a small orange hatchback rolled into the NHRA Tech Bay fender exit pipes sizzling, while a Pennsylvania engineer nicknamed Grumpy watched in silence. By Sunday, that slight silhouette was tearing through the 60-foot and running mid-9s, toppling favored Hemi and lighting the fuse for roughly 6 national wins that season. The secret wasn't brute force, it was power to weight, a rigid spine beneath showroom skin, and geometry that turned launches into a metronome. Fans recognized the shape, officials recognized a loophole. Is it still production-based if the skeleton plays by different rules? When legality hardens into inevitability, the boundaries must be redrawn. Hit play and follow the evidence to the answer. Why did a Chevy Vega force the NHRA to change the rules? Early 1970, pro stock felt fair because it looked fair. If a car wore showroom panels and packed big cubic inches, the grandstands believed the matchup made sense. Then a compact Chevy Vega rolled into tech at the start of 1972, with Bill "Grumpy" Jenkins' eyes like calipers, manner like a metronome, and the comfort story began to wobble. Inspectors could certify displacement, carburetors, wheelbase, and body panels. The stopwatch would soon certify behavior. The shell was familiar, but the way the car behaved under low lighter mass, calmer chassis reactions, cleaner aero footprint, didn't resemble the heavy hitters it parked beside. What fans and officials were really enforcing, without saying so, was appearance. What the track measures, relentlessly, is architecture. How loads travel through rails and cross members, how pickup points stay put, how power to weight converts torque into traction. When the smallest silhouette starts posting times that threaten established Hemi and big block programs, the category's social contract, stock looking equals comparable, shows a crack. That crack is where this story lives. To answer the title, Why Did a Chevy Vega Force the NHRA to Change the Rules?, we have to move fairness from silhouettes to specifications. The Vega didn't rely on exotic trickery, it relied on certainty, a repeatable pattern born from weight discipline, structural rigidity, and disciplined geometry. Those elements weren't described clearly in the period rulebook, which listed parts but not the behaviors that decide races. Once repeatable performance appears inside a rule set written for looks, language must evolve to describe how a production-based chassis must actually carry load and attach its body so spectators see a shape they recognize and competitors fight within verifiable boundary. This is the premise shift that sets the investigation in motion. Most pro-stock programs in the early 70s chased peak horsepower because the dyno made that pursuit look rational. The Chevy Vega inverted the logic by chasing the ratio that racing actually feels, at the tire power divided by pounds. Less mass means less inertia to overcome at the hit, a calmer chassis to manage as torque climbs, and a smaller frontal area cutting aerodynamic work for the engine. Rule of thumb, trimming about 0.1 s in the 60-foot can yield roughly 0.2 s in overall ET. An approximation crews use, not a physical constant. The Vega exploited that bargain. With a small block running at a lower minimum weight, early track increments improved, drive shaft traces smoothed, and the car stayed inside its tuning window as track temperature and grip wandered. What looked like less engine on paper translated into more average acceleration where it counts, the launch and first 330 feet. This is the first concrete answer to the title. The Vega forced the NHRA to rethink rules because a lighter, cleaner package turned modest horsepower into predictable speed week after week. When a rule set primarily measures cubic inches and verifies body panels, but the stopwatch rewards power to weight and controllable load paths, parity becomes an accident. To preserve competitive credibility, definitions must acknowledge the ratio. Weight tables that scale with wheelbase and displacement, and technical language that considers how a platform's mass and aero profile amplify the same horsepower number. Once that lens clicks into place, the next question naturally appears. Ratios don't win by themselves. Structures make those ratios show up every pass. That is where the story moves next, into the skeleton under the skin and the disciplined load paths that convert a theoretical advantage into repeatable, round-winning reality. From grandstand distance, the car read, Showroom Vega. Up close, the story was load paths and discipline. The advantage wasn't a single shiny part, it was where the forces went when the clutch hit. Cross members that actually worked, braces that resisted twist, and carefully located mounting points kept the chassis from walking under torque. Rule of thumb, when torsional rigidity rises substantially, launch-to-launch variation in the 60-foot can drop by noticeable hundredths, not a law of physics, but a pattern experienced crews recognize. That steadiness is gold in eliminations. Instead of wasting energy flexing metal, the driveline stayed aligned and the tires saw a similar angle of attack each pass. Inspectors could tick boxes, panels present, wheelbase correct, displacement verified. Yet the stopwatch was reacting to something the checklist didn't fully name, a structure behaving less like a compromise and more like a controlled test rig. This directly advances the answer to, why did a Chevy Vega force the NHRA to change the rules? Because a rulebook that catalogs parts and silhouettes but under-describes structure will reward whoever optimizes the unseen skeleton. To keep production-based meaningful, specifications must say how the car carries load, which longitudinal rails must remain OEM in location and material, how the body attaches, where reinforcement is permitted, and what continuity is required so production members do real work. Clear structural language doesn't ban ingenuity, it channels it into boundaries the public can recognize and rivals can trust. With the skeleton stabilized, tiny adjustments suddenly matter. Geometry stops guessing and starts predicting. That sets up the next move in the chain, how precise pickup point locations, instant center, and anti-squat convert stiffness into launch authority, the moment where tenths are won before horsepower has a chance to speak. The opening 60 feet don't just start the run, they shape the outcome. With a rigid base underneath, tiny geometric changes behave like levers. Move the instant center a couple of inches and you redirect weight transfer. Set anti-squat correctly and the tire sees a clean, square bite instead of a smear. On the Vega, McPherson strut tops that stayed put and a 3-link rear with disciplined bracket heights produced nearly identical drives. Shaft traces, pass after pass. Rule of thumb, a clean improvement of 0.01 s in 60 foot can be worth roughly 0.02 s in ET, an approximation tuners use, not a constant. The point isn't a magic number, it's the pattern. Heavier, flexier cars chased the track as conditions drifted. The lighter, stiffer, package-treated launch like a repeatable procedure. Same squat, same rise, same wheel speed curve. Predictability is terrifying in a heads-up class because predictability stacks rounds. This is a direct step toward answering the title. The Vega pressured the NHRA because the rules policed components, what parts were present, while the advantage lived in relationships, where pickup points sat and how they moved under load. When geometry can wander far from OEM intent yet still pass a parts checklist, legality and inevitability begin to coexist, and inevitability drains suspense and variety. Protecting a production-based identity therefore requires explicit geometry windows. Which suspension types are allowed, permissible pickup point ranges, tower and bracket coordinates, and the attachment logic that keeps those coordinates honest under torque. Define the relationships and victory returns to execution instead of a hidden architectural subsidy. With geometry boxed in by clear, explainable limits, the next tension point surfaces in the open, the tech bay, where a car can read legal on paper yet feel unfair to the paddock and the public, a paradox governance must resolve decisively. Picture the tech bay as a courtroom that smells like race fuel. The Vega idles, with fender exit headers ticking while 3 authorities share jurisdiction: the rulebook, the stopwatch, and the grandstands. On paper, the car clears the checklist. Displacement verified, carburetors counted, wheelbase measured, panels present. Yet rivals sense something else, a prototype wearing a showroom suit. Protests spike not because a single bolt is wrong, but because the boundary feels wrong. The public reads production-based as structure that behaves like a production structure. The stopwatch reports a different story, repeatable launches and calm mid-track manners that suggest laboratory control. The contradiction is visible, legality and legitimacy have drifted apart. When a rule set catalogs parts and silhouettes but underspecifies load paths, attachment logic, and geometry limits, a clever build can be both compliant and, to competitors, fundamentally unequal. That tension erodes trust, the quiet currency of a healthy class. Answering why did a Chevy Vega force the NHRA to change the rules begins by translating unease into language. Governance can't run on vibes, it must speak diagrams and coordinates. Clarify what must remain OEM, longitudinal rails, location and material, how bodies attach, defined fasteners and planes, and where reinforcement is permitted, explicit zones that ensure production members carry real load. bound kinematics with permissible suspension types and pickup point windows, constrain exhaust routing so packaging cannot sneak in geometry factories never used, pair structure with economics by refining weight tables that scale with wheelbase and displacement taper advantage without outlawing efficiency. None of this criminalizes ingenuity. It simply prices structural leverage so multiple routes to victory remain viable. When mechanisms are defined, the paradox collapses. The same car that once felt like an ambush becomes a competitor inside a map everyone can read. Only then can results be trusted again, because the stopwatch is speaking the same language as the rulebook and the crowd. Inevitability is bad entertainment. Once the Vega concept matured, Sundays began to feel pre-written, tidy 60-foots, clean mid-track, steady imph, and margins that looked repeatable rather than miraculous. McNett was uncountable style and irreversible temper puzzled. Contemporary accounts credit the package with about 6 national wins in 1972, not a sacred number, but enough to signal a process instead of a hot streak. In the pits, crew chiefs quietly converged on the same 3 levers: weight, stiffness, geometry, while budgets started tilting toward lighter shells, braced towers, reinforced rails, and precisely located brackets. That's how variety thins, not by decree but by spreadsheet. If one architecture becomes the only rational path to survival, programs that can't or won't re-platform fade, suppliers retool around the winner, and fans see fewer shapes and philosophies at the line, the class that promised multiple production-based routes to speed begins to collapse into a single viable recipe. And suspense motorsports oxygen gets scarce. This is a direct reason the Vega forced the NHRA to change the rules. Unchecked architectural leverage creates monoculture risk. A sanctioning body is the trustee of surprise. Its job is to keep several plausible ways to win alive at the same time. The remedy is not retroactive punishment, but prospective pricing of advantages. Start with weight, refine minimums that scale with wheelbase and displacement so a tiny platform's leverage is tapered, not unlimited. Move to structure, require OEM rail location material continuity and define body-to-chassis attachment so production members carry real load, not just legality. Finish with kinematics, approve suspension types and set pickup point windows, including tower and bracket coordinates, so geometry can be tuned without drifting into prototype territory. These moves don't ban ingenuity, they meter it. So success returns to execution, driving setup adaptation, instead of a single template's compound interest. Get this right, and 4 different cars can plausibly win on the same weekend, which restores tension for fans and strategic choice for teams. Leave it vague and the grid shrinks by rational imitation. That is why governance has to act before sameness hardens. The healthiest outcome is a rulebook that preserves the thrill of innovation while protecting the audience's right to uncertainty. Rulebooks don't restore trust, clarity does. After the Vega showed that parts lists and silhouettes can coexist with architectural inevitability, the only fix was language racers could aim at. Start with weights. Publish transparent tables that tie minimum weight to displacement and wheelbase, stepped in predictable increments, taper small body leverage without erasing the philosophy of efficiency. Move to structure, specify which longitudinal rails must remain OEM in location and material. Define body-to-chassis planes and fasteners. Allow reinforcement only in mapped zones so production members carry real load. Finish with kinematics. Declare allowed suspension types and set pickup point windows. To carry allowed suspension type. And set pickup point lengths, angles, bound exhaust routing, so packaging cannot smuggle geometry the factory never used. When relationships are defined, ingenuity becomes a craft again, not a loophole. Translate that clarity into repeatable enforcement. These are proposed modern tools, not historical 1972 practice. Scrutineering jigs that pin rail centerlines. Go-no-go gauges through spec holes to confirm wall thickness. Pre-ament CAD submissions, audited against the rule geometry. A digital chassis passport logging coordinates, materials, and updates across the season. Pair this with data reviews each year, adjust weight tables and geometry windows based on observed parity so multiple concepts stay viable. None of this criminalizes cleverness, it prices structural leverage so wins return to execution rather than to an unpriced architecture. That, directly, is why the Vega forced the NHRA to change the rules. it exposed the gap between what the book said and what the cars did. Close the gap with diagrams and verbs, and the class keeps both identity and suspense. With the map redrawn, one question remains for the finale. What lesson endures once the public has seen efficiency beat brute force? The closing chapter distills that legacy, the mental model the sport can no longer unsee, and how precise rules turn the next disruptive idea into a better race, not a crisis. Once a lighter, calmer package beats bigger numbers in public, the sport's mental model updates and it doesn't revert. 3 truths became visible to everyone at once. 1. Power to weight can trump headline horsepower. 2. Rigidity and geometry turn modest torque into reliable traction. 3. Fairness you can explain outlasts fairness you only feel. Fans learn to look past silhouettes and ask how a car actually carries load. Competitors learned that constraints are levers, not handcuffs. The Vega didn't merely win races, it taught audiences to separate costume from skeleton. That shift matters because pro stock sells recognition and uncertainty. Recognition comes from shapes you know, uncertainty comes from multiple viable ways to win. When a single architecture converts legality into inevitability, uncertainty evaporates, and with it, the reason to watch. Here is the clean answer to the title. The Chevy Vega forced the NHRA to change the rules because it exposed omissions that let a production shell disguise a purpose-built pathway to repeatability. The fix is not nostalgia, it is precision. Define structure, OEM rails, attachment planes, reinforcement zones, price, mass, properly, weight tables, scaling with wheelbase and displacement, and bound kinematics. Allowed suspension types, pickup point windows, exhaust routing that can't smuggle geometry. Do that, and innovation is welcome just metered so success returns to execution, driving, setup, adaptation. The legacy is a habit of governance. Measure what matters, publish what you mean, and tune the map as data arrives so several concepts remain competitive at once. Next time a brilliant dissenter arrives with a tidy 60-foot and suspiciously calm mid-track manners, officials won't need a hunch. They'll have coordinates. Builders still have a broad canvas. Fans still get real suspense. The category stays both recognizable and alive because the rulebook now speaks the language the stopwatch has always spoken. In the end, this small hatch proves wins don't come from brute force alone, but from power to weight, chassis rigidity, and precise geometry. When efficiency exposes gaps, rules must evolve to preserve fairness and a true production-based spirit. Your turn. Where's the right boundary between innovation and the class's identity? Drop your take below. And if you enjoyed this dive, please like, comment, subscribe, and turn on the bell for Muscle Cars Revolution so you never miss the next run down the strip.